Hey everybody, I wanted to share a case study from Lattice Wealth Management. They are an independent financial advisor based in San Jose, California. And on the case study, I'm going to share their situation, how we help them build a content creation and distribution machine that predictably drives new soft introductions to the business and expands awareness of their current service offerings to their current clients. And a little bit later, you're going to hear from the executive director / owner, Mike Ross. And we're going to talk about one kind of controversial method that we used to hack distribution that worked really well. And that helped us create more leads and engagement. So some background on this. The client and his team worked at a big bank since about 1987. And working at a big bank has certain advantages like name recognition. But when you go independent, you lose all those benefits. So you don't have that same recognition. You don't have the brand behind your company. And so this is kind of like hope-based marketing, meaning you had to hope that the bank's strong brand would carry you to success. Because they didn't do their own marketing, there was no tracking in place, and the engagement was pretty sporadic because distribution was tactical and business was pretty much all referral-based. So new business was driven by the owner, Mike Ross, along with the strength of that brand. Now that they are independent, they needed marketing help. And in 2021, I and my team got involved at that point, and we advised on content marketing strategy. So I advised that he write a book to help broaden awareness of his business to advisors and to the public. And we created a podcast which enabled him to reach out to leaders in the industry and also share that information with his desired target audience. Using the book content, we created webinars, which we then applied to CFP and IWI for continuing education, which shows much more engagement, and it's easier to monetize content when it has continuing education behind it, because advisors need to keep their credentials, and in order to do that, they need to get continuing education. So it's required to keep your credentials. So then, because we own all those assets, the webinars, he owns the book, we own the podcast content, we chop that up into social media assets. We also employ what I call the 1-to-5 content ratio commandment. And this states that for every one piece of content, 5 others must be created. So to see it in action, this means you record one piece of content, and this creates 3 different reels on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, right? You make those reels, you see which one performs the best, and then you put those, you double down on the content which was emanated from that high-performing reel. And then from that, you create a Facebook ad or a YouTube short. You put it on YouTube, right? You double down on that one. You make a blog post. You make a LinkedIn article. Or maybe you make another podcast based upon the topic. This is 8 pieces of content total, 9 if you create the original piece. So that is how you employ the commandment of 5-to-1 content. But by activating these strategies, Lattice now has a clear plan for growth through content creation that runs itself, right? We created and we had approved 20 pieces of continuing education content. We created 45 total pieces of content. The webinar events, they drove 29 new exclusive leads in 1 month alone. And exclusive being that you don't have to share these with somebody else that bought the leads from Smart Asset, right? Where you don't have to scrounge over them like a vulture. These are leads that you own because they were the time and place that you gave somebody that you already know possibly, or your fellow panelists, to come to that event. So that shows huge interest, and for the people that came, that's even more interest. So those are exclusive leads for him. So now in 2024, Lattice has a predictable machine to identify what the audience wants, align their expertise with that demand. We recruit panelists, we market the content, whether that's a webinar or a podcast or a LinkedIn event, we market that, and then we drive exclusive leads to their business. So this is a repeatable machine that we can use over and over and over to broaden awareness of their brand, broaden interest in their company, and drive leads through this process. So here's a quick interview with Mike Ross about this process, how we came in, what the things that they're doing, and how their business has changed because of it. If you'd like to learn how to produce more content, increase your online presence, and build your business using digital marketing, schedule some time on our calendar for a strategy call. Here's the full interview with Lattice Wealth Management Group owner and executive director, Mike Ross. So just, if you could introduce yourself and your company and then the services that you provide.
Okay, my name is Mike Ross. My company name is Lattice Wealth Management Group, Inc. I would describe us as, number one, an independent financial advisor, and number two, is usually it is not just about doing investment management. We do that, we're compensated by that, but it is that is not the key reason someone hires us. Someone hires us because they have a jumble of assets that they need to get clarity on what those assets are and how they can achieve some goals with that jumble of assets.
Okay. And like specifically, what type of services do you guys provide?
Well, again, certainly investment management and investment guidance, and in its own way, financial planning. That's far simpler than what you would hear from others, but in its own way, financial planning. But as an example, my next call today is with a client and an investment banker. Not because she wants to sell her business, because she wants to buy more businesses. I deal with stock plans. I deal with real estate transactions. Not so much as someone who's doing the nitty-gritty work, but as someone who can objectively advise clients on how to do those kinds of things, where I really don't have any axe to grind in terms of revenue. I'm just trying to get the client from step one to step two, knowing what I know about those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. And so your business changed. Your business changed in 2021, right? What was the change that was made?
So are you alluding to going independent?
Yes.
So after having worked for a wirehouse, a big bank, for 34 years, I went independent, and the first 6 months was exclusively involved, like everybody else who does the same thing, with getting clients from one firm to another. Lots and lots of effort put into that. And again, like just about everybody else, within 2 years, we moved the bulk of the assets across. Maybe a half a dozen clients stayed at the other firm, but the rest came with us and are clients with us, for as long as they want to be.
Mm-hmm. From a content marketing perspective, and when I say that, I mean the things that you use, the words and videos that you use to find new clients or find prospects or develop relationships. What did your business look like at that point?
So all I had in the summer of 2021 was a bunch of clients who had known me for, in many cases, 20 or 30 years. I had nothing else other than that. At the previous firm, I used the term Lattice Wealth Management of the bank. I just took the bank name off and I kept the name. I'm going to tell you that many of the clients even then didn't really connect the dots with the whole Lattice Wealth Management thing. It was just me. They were just working with me. So the ability to create a brand became paramount. And also, when you're working for a big bank, their name is on the marquee. I'm just an employee. I have no presence beyond that employee stuff. There have been compromises made by all the banks to allow people to kind of show themselves, but it's still all about the bank. So I had an immediate branding problem with any new business. They needed to figure out who I was, and that's really where we started on that whole road.
Where did that start?
Well, I think it started with putting muscle, developing a website, developing content for the website. Also, you can't dismiss the idea that there is another Lattice Wealth Management Group, Lattice Wealth in another state. So I needed to make sure that if somebody searched for me online, they could find us as opposed to the ones that are in, I think it's Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. And also, obviously there was the book, right?
So the book was and remains important for a couple reasons. Number one is there's a certain amount of gravitas with having published a book. I've learned that since then. There's a certain amount of it. People are relatively impressed by publishing a book. That's an important step. When I do get new clients in, the first thing I do in that first meeting is I give them a copy of the book. That's better than a business card. But the second thing, and really my goal with that book is, I needed to use some thorough content to describe what we do to seek out younger financial advisors to join us. Mm-hmm. That was really the goal, because it was kind of a technical book that really wasn't meant for the public. It was meant for young financial advisors. So that was a second piece to the puzzle that I sought at the time.
Mm-hmm. What other content marketing initiatives have you wanted to create, and then we made those things happen?
So after that, what dawned on me was that since this was for financial advisors, we could take the content in that book and convert it into a series of webinars meant for young financial advisors, describing how we work. I'm gonna describe our approach to both portfolio management and financial advice is a little irreverent. It's a little bit different, a little bit non-traditional. And so what we were able to do really over the next 12 months after the book was published was create a series of webinars describing in pretty thorough detail exactly how we felt about different concepts within investment and financial management.
And so what other kind of content marketing ideas did you want to be working on?
So from those, we developed a pretty good rhythm around doing interviews with people too. So that led to a series of interviews with friends of mine in peripheral skill sets, and they're all on the Just Build Wealth website. But that led to a series of webinars, and again, the goal was to show the breadth of information we had in different skills. The other thing that it did that I really didn't see coming is without any exceptions, everyone embraced the idea of being interviewed on a webinar. So what I built out there is a meaningful number of allies that were complemented by the fact that we interviewed them and kind of became our connection. They became good connections to rely on for different things we needed.
Yeah. At one point, you wanted to do a podcast as well.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. So the interviews that I just described, we converted into podcasts.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I think was unique about what we did with podcasting was that traditionally podcasting is just put on an RSS feed and you hope to get viewers. But we came up with the idea of having a premiere through LinkedIn.
So that was your idea, and it worked very well. So about a year ago now, I got a hold of a fresh marketing list that I would do LinkedIn invitations with. But once we did the invitations, really nothing happened. So I needed to find a way to stay front of mind with these people. The approach we took was that we would take these podcast interviews and we would create podcast premieres. So it wouldn't be just that we drop them into social media and hope people listen to them. We'd literally do a very sophisticated invitation. We'd invite them both via LinkedIn invitation as opposed to just posting it, as well as via email. And we would, not as much by email, but via LinkedIn, we would get, if we did it right, we'd get between 20 and 40 people that were RSVP. Now that does not discount the number of people that we invited, so that we still had name recognition, we were still relevant to them, that didn't. But we got between, again, depending on our execution, we got between 20 and 40 RSVPs of people that wanted to listen to these.
Yeah, I think that's important because, like I said, often you put content out there, but it doesn't have a date and time on it.
Right.
So when you do, you drive people towards an event, a specific date and time online that you can promote people to. And just like you said, it gets you to stay in front of them, so they see your name, they see your face, they see your brand out there, and by you promoting it, it lets you add value to whatever they're doing, just by the fact of promoting it. Let alone if they show up, even better, right? If they register, wonderful. But the fact that you have something to promote to people is a really critical asset, because it's a date and time and place, and that shows interest in that topic as well, right?
One thing that's very easy for people to dismiss is the difference between marketing and sales. Sales happens when someone else is ready to act. But in order to maintain that brand awareness, you got to keep spending money on marketing. I mean, when you're working for a big bank and their name is in the marquee, everyone knows who they are. But if you're independent, no one knows who you are. So you got to invest some of that money that you would have been given to that bank, if that's the case, in creating a brand awareness. This is much easier to do in 2024 than it was in 2014, because you have this wide array of social media, in addition to email, in addition to other kinds of marketing. So being able to put this stuff together isn't that difficult. And it makes an enormous impact on maintaining that brand awareness.
Yeah. Can you talk about the things that we did, that me and my team did, to kind of help you create that brand awareness, like the different elements that we put in place?
I would say the key thing is, number one, we produced the podcasts. Number two is, once we got all the approvals internally that we could use materials that you created for us, we were able to leverage those materials and do the podcast premieres. But not to be dismissed, we're doing the thumbnails, giving us ideas on new technology, giving us ideas on how to, we started doing these in a very basic way, and we weren't getting the RSVPs. So that's when, with your suggestion, we jumped up and we started using Zoom for invitations. So the ability to give us insight into what to be using, as well as executing on the use, was paramount to the process.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back in time a little bit to the continuing education.
Okay.
Talk me through your intention behind wanting to create continuing education and the process that we took to do that.
Okay, so I wrote the book. I sold a decent number of copies. It was a bestseller.
Amazon bestseller.
Amazon bestseller. Okay, so you've sold your book copies, but really what you've done is, with the book, you've created intellectual property. And that intellectual property, and big companies do this all the time, that intellectual property can be taken advantage of in multiple different ways. It can be taken advantage of via selling a book. It can take advantage of being speaking engagements, and I didn't put much effort into that. I ended up getting one speaking engagement from that first book. But then we took the book and we converted it into webinars, and the challenge with the webinars is you're competing with the big boys. With this second book, the likelihood is that I'll use a few different approaches. But the point I'm making is, it's intellectual property you just created. You're giving people your opinion on how to do things. That opinion has resonated with many people over the years, so it has an ability to resonate. How do you get the information out? You can do it via a webinar, where you can really go into detail on what you do and why you've done it.
So an important point about why we used webinars and why we created CE using those webinars was because I've worked at a webinar platform for a long time, and I know that when you have continuing education that you're hosting on a webinar platform, or really anywhere, right? People are much more likely to register and watch it, because when they have a license, they are required to get a percentage, or 24 hours, whatever, of watching continuing education every year in order to keep their license.
Right.
So that compels them to need to seek out and consume, and pay for, in many cases, continuing education. So we created it with that in mind as well, using the intellectual property that you already had, right? We're like, how can we amplify this and ideally get people paying us to create it? So we created it with that in mind as well.
Right.
let's see. So we talked about that, and also there's the whole process of actually getting it approved for, like,
Yeah.
so we get it approved through CFP, IWI. That's a whole process because I don't know if you remember what went into this.
I think you handled most of it.
Yeah, so I'll briefly bring you through it. First, you have to take the content that you want to write. They have a very specific format that they want to have that content created in, right? You need to have the learning outcomes all stated, whether it's beginner level, medium level, or expert level. You need to state like how you're going to kind of stage gate when somebody goes through, like how are they, can we say like they actually watched it for this long? Webinar platforms allow you to do that, but also you need to have them take a test so that they can say, they can prove that they actually consumed it and they learned it, right? So we had to show to CFP and IWI, like, yes, this is what we're going to be talking about. These are the credentials of the people that are teaching it, right? Or person that's teaching it. And we took all of that from the original book, which is a really good idea because then you don't have to write anything else, right? You just got to formatted it into the way that these credential giving bodies want to consume that, right? And there's some, you got to pay to have those credentials, but once you can say like, yes, this is approved by CFP, or yes, this is approved by IWI, then you can have that, and you can go out and promote that pieces of content to people, and that gets them much more likely to want to watch it, right? Again, more added value. Ideally, you get paid for it, and we did get paid, probably less than we would have liked, but it's a test, right? You're testing how can you get your content in front of people, and that's one thing that we did. And so I think that was a good test. Oh, let's talk about the webinar that you did recently. That was the one on team time and tenure. Right. So what was your thoughts about doing that?
So we'd been doing these podcasts. The podcasts we would produce in advance, and then we would, and it was just one interview. Now, in one of my networking groups, I have for years been doing panel discussions. I would bring in, I'm doing another one next week. I would bring in 3 experts. I would ask each of them for some questions they wanted to answer and get some visibility on. They would give me the questions, and I would go through and take 25, 30 minutes, and we would ask the questions, and they would answer them. And in this networking group that I was in, or I remain in, we got rave reviews on these things. So I said, why can't I take this concept? But we never recorded them. Why can't we take this concept, take it to a specific group of people that I'm trying to court as a services provider, and do something similar? So I found 3 people that had a very good skill set in what they did, and B had a really good because we'd interviewed them already, we knew that they had a pretty good social media presence. I asked them to do it. They gave us the questions. We ran through this webinar, 45 minutes, something like that. Each of them got plenty of exposure. And then once again, we did a podcast premiere. The difference is we tried to run it live, and we threw out some polling questions. I think we can probably improve that next time. But we threw out some polling questions to get a gist of things. And we premiered it, but literally my next appointment is with an existing client and one of the people on that podcast premiere. And what I was able to do to get her to talk to this guy is, when she mentioned something she wanted to do a couple weeks ago, I said, I want you to listen to a podcast. I emailed it to her, and I know she listened to it. So that builds credibility both in my eyes for her, as well as in these other guys' eyes for her. She realizes that there's more to me than just managing her money.
How do you know that she listened to it?
Because she told me she did.
Oh, okay.
She told me she listened to it on the drive home. Mm-hmm. So that's, and I've begun to do that more and more. I think that's something that's really worth bringing up, is when I run into situations where a client has an existing issue that I've dealt with and I've interviewed people via podcast, I will push my website to them, to the page where we have all these podcasts. And even if they don't listen to them, they realize that I know something about that stuff, which again is a credibility enhancer.
So using kind of the content system that we've created of identifying guests, asking them, hey, do you want to come and speak about this topic, right? This has given you a library of content that you can use not only to build your brand from a awareness perspective, but also when you have somebody that you're speaking with, they're a prospect, you want to let them know more about what you're doing, you can say, I spoke about this already. Here's a link to this on my website, and they can also consume everything else on the website as well.
Yes.
So they really get a better idea about everything that you do, and you know the authority that you have in the space, the experience, things like that.
And for an existing client, if I'm working with them in one dimension, I can expand on that dimension, which will ultimately lead to either business or referrals.
So from 2021, when you went independent and you're like, okay, before I had a brand that I was known for, right? Now it's me with my team, to now, what would you say is like the biggest differences in how you're approaching content now that you have a machine that's made?
Well, I think I can do it more consistently. In other words, right now I have a podcast, an interview we're doing, I think it's next week. I have 4 people that one of which I've already invited, and I have 3 others that I'm targeting to do more podcasts, and I think it just becomes an ongoing thing. The flywheel is running. We've already got all the infrastructure built in. We know how compliance approaches it, so we just keep chopping wood, keep knocking these things out. As time goes by, we keep doing them, we keep posting them, doing the podcast premiere, and it just becomes part of the routine. And that's really what you want. You want a process that you've established that you just keep doing. And all that does is increase your credibility.
So after working kind of with me and my team, how would you say that you said we kind of built out the infrastructure, right? From your perspective, what does that infrastructure look like now?
Well, I think it's a predictable thing. In other words, we've done it several times. There's things we know we can tweak, we can improve, and we're working on those. But the core of it is, one of my strengths is I have a lot of connections that do peripheral things that involve my clients. I can interview them, and after that I can introduce them via a podcast to the client, which serves both the interviewee as well as me, because it enhances credibility. And it's a process that you build in, that once you have that process established, the other thing that is different for every firm, but is predictable, is you got to be able to get your compliance department to see what you're doing, and once you do that once or twice, you bring them another one, and I'm not going to say they rubber stamp it, but they know what you're doing and they know what you're trying to accomplish, and that makes it easier on the compliance side.
How would you say like having a content infrastructure, a predictable process, has impacted your business?
Again, I can't point to right now any particular clients that I've brought in because of it, but what I can point to is I can use it to create better awareness, which I have done, as well as it's helped me with existing clients in dimensions that they never really thought I had as part of the practice. In so many cases, and this has been true my entire career, your client kind of puts you in a bucket, and bursting out of that bucket to do other things with them is really, really hard. But once you can show credible expertise in other things, you expand that bucket. And that's an important thing for ongoing business.
And that's kind of what we've been able to build out, that capability.
Yes.
Okay. What would you say to somebody that's like, oh, A, should I be doing content marketing? And B, should I hire this guy?
Well, again, if you're working for some big firm, you probably don't need to do it because they're supplying it and they have all the credibility. But if you're an independent advisor with no breadth of name recognition, showing your capabilities via content marketing in the world we're living today is A, easier and easier, and B, more and more necessary to kind of break you out from the noise.
Yeah.
And the beauty of doing it with you is it's kind of turnkey, right? I don't have to invent anything. And one of the side benefits is you're constantly feeding me new things to read to kind of keep me up to date. Okay, I have this gimmick I use with mobile devices and with computers, where whether I need it or not, every fourth year I buy a phone or an iPad or a computer, or now a Windows machine for my workstation every 4 years. That by itself forces me to keep up with technology. Metaphorically, what you're doing by giving me content to read and to review forces me to keep up with technology. And without that, it's easy to fall into a rut and just keep doing what you're doing. And that's a problem, because you got to stay kind of on the cutting edge of things, or you're not going to attract new clientele who is on the cutting edge of things.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Plus, it's also fun, right?
Yeah.
We get to talk about, like, oh, have you tried this idea? Did you read this book? Let's try that out,
Yeah.
right? We know what the North Star is. We know where we want to be going, but the means of getting there can change. It probably should. But I try to stay on what are these cutting edge of things, and how can we actually practically use that and implement that into the business. So that the experimentation is also a lot of fun too.
Well, and again, you got to go in knowing that some things are going to work and some things aren't.
Yeah.
And failing a few things is just a function of trying stuff. You got to fail a few times on things, or you never figure out what's going to work. That's been proven with industries across the spectrum. Think about all the things that have evolved because the company that's set in stone doesn't adapt.
So, question, I guess, for some advisors, do you have a forcing function? Whether that's a technological forcing function or a vendor forcing function, saying, "Are you doing this? You need to be doing this," right?
Yeah, and the other thing is you are distinguished by the questions you ask. If the questions people are asking you aren't provoking you to learn new things, then you're not asking other people the right questions too.
Yeah.
So many things where depending on what questions people ask you shows intention. So this is another way to develop new questions to ask people.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I got the name of the company and your name and the services you provide. So could you just go through that once
Sure.
more?
Again, my name is Mike Ross. I'm the owner of Lattice Wealth Management. We're based in San Jose, California. Our financial advice isn't just investment advice. It's across the spectrum of different things that people need to get from point A to point B financially.
Mm-hmm. I do have one more question that I hadn't written down. Where has your business come from traditionally? Referrals. So primarily referrals.
Yeah.
Okay. And then once you kind of went independent, you're like, I need to find other ways to do this, or what kind of drove you to do that anyway?
Well, what drove me to do it is, again, there's no big marquee saying I work for such and such bank. So I don't have that name recognition. I don't have that gravitas. So being able to demonstrate that it's me and it wasn't the bank, it was me, led me to use content marketing to show competence around things.
Cool. Fortunate. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right, did we achieve what you sought?
Yeah. Yes.
Hey everybody, this is Ryan Ross from Independent Financial Advisor Marketing. I wanted to share a case study from a client, Lattice Wealth Management. They are an independent financial advisor based in San Jose, California. And on this case study, I'm going to share their situation, their results. You're going to hear from the executive, the owner, Mike Ross, and just some top line information about the business. They were at a big bank until 2020. and they went independent starting in 2021. And up until 2021, they didn't really have a marketing arm. They knew they had to take content creation seriously in 2021 and branding. So they wrote a book, started doing a podcast. They implemented a great podcast distribution strategy, which is spoken about in the interview. We also did continuing education. And in 2024, they have a predictable machine to identify what the audience wants, align with their expertise, align the content of what the audience wants with their expertise. We recruit panelists, we market the content, and we drive exclusive leads to the business. And exclusive because in some cases you might buy from a smart asset or other company that helps you find leads, but you're often running for leads with 2 or 3 other advisors. So this is what I mean by exclusive. These are only owned by you. And so that's what we create for them. So check out this interview, and thanks so much for watching. So this case study talks about how Lattice Wealth Management implemented a content distribution system that predictively drives new soft introductions to the business and expands the awareness of the service offering to their clients. And so just a little bit about the content that we've created over the past few years. We've created marketing assets. We've done 5 webinars. We've done 29 podcasts, 14 LinkedIn events. Got to change that. A little bit about the content that we've created. There are the marketing assets that we've created are 5 webinars, 29 podcasts, 14 LinkedIn events, and then there's 3 on-site videos that were produced and we edited. In terms of the prospects engaged through webinars, we engaged 194 prospects. We did over 100 podcast engagements. True leads out of this were 29 leads in the past month alone. That was September 2024. And we can see that these quick stats in terms of what was happening before we came in and started working with them, they pretty much relied on a big bank to help them do the branding. The big bank was the company that they were associated with, right? Oftentimes, this means you're creating hope-based content for hope-based. Oftentimes, this means you're using more of a strategy of hope for content creation and distribution than anything else, if you have the approvals to actually do that when you're at the wirehouse. So we help them kind of adjust that. Other things that were challenges, they didn't have any tracking in place. They weren't doing any marketing, so there was nothing to track. Engagement was sporadic in any content that they did do, and they didn't know how many soft introductions they could create. But what we did was we implemented these plans. We created a clear plan for growth through content creation. This created 20 pieces of continuing education content. Continuing education is important because it allows you to create much more engagement in the content being created, because when you are offering a continuing education to licensed professionals, to keep their license, they have to consume the content, and they need to have 24 hours of continuing education credits throughout a 2-year span. So we created those, and those can be monetized, and they were. There's a process to go through to create continuing education, depending on which institution provides or gives out the credits. But we went through that process, and we had 20 pieces of continuing education content created, so that Lattice could market that to their audience. In general, there were about 45 pieces of content created: webinars, podcasts, continuing education. Pieces fell into that category. And then just this past month, in September, there were 29 new exclusive leads delivered to the business. And this is one example of a panel that we put on to create those leads, right? It's a lot better when you're creating content to have a time and place where you are promoting it to people. And this is part of our podcast premiere strategy. We set a date and time, we promote it to people when we do a replay. Well, in this case, it was live. But these 3 guests, in addition to Mike, they showed up, they spoke, we promoted it to the audience, and then you follow up with emails after the fact. So that's just one example of the kind of content that we created for them. So the general strategy the general strategy that we use with Lattice and that we use with other clients is we create a content creation plan and we execute that plan. We do niche targeting to identify who the audience is, and we integrate that into the niche content plan. We have a distribution strategy that we put in place in order to reach your audience. We also do guest outreach to finding guests for the podcast and the panels, and there's a whole process involved in getting them to actually come on the podcast or come on the webinar. We make sure that promotion strategy is refined based upon the audiences that we're trying to target, and then we make sure that we can cut up the individual pieces of content after the webinar is created, after the podcast is recorded, after the videos at schools or industry events are recorded. We can cut up those pieces of content and we can distribute that to the audience through email, through social marketing, through direct emails to clients. And then we make sure we can track to see what is working, what needs to be adjusted in terms of the content that you're creating, because audiences' tastes evolve and you need to change with those tastes to make sure that the content you're creating is engaging to people over a long period of time. And we track that using the platforms and knowing what to look at on those platforms. So this is just one example of a client that we... So now, after working with us for a few years, Lattice they have a predictable machine to help them create content, generate broad awareness of their brand, and drive people down the funnel to, when they are at the right point in time, be able to reach out and say, hey, I need help with my wealth management needs, with my financial advising needs, with my estate planning needs. And this is exactly what Lattice Wealth Management does.